yield to Mark's process now. Not that you would. You probably yield one to a friend or something like that. But you don't have your program has no involvement in the selection of the next process to run. That's the operating system's job. Okay. And there's algorithms. When we get to that, we talk about scheduling. So there's a lot of complexity here. When I ask you, and I will, what are the steps in a context switch? This diagram is 90% of what you need. Okay? You could put all that into words, but it would be a lot of writing, wouldn't it? So I encourage you to remember the diagram. And there may be some spots like select the next process. Well, we know that in XV6 is going to be to run the routine scheduler, which we'll see by the time we get to the midterm. And we'll look at that in some detail. So there's some things we'll explain a little bit more detail on. Like when we save the process context switch, we're going to save it to what's called the process control block in the process structure.
I think you say you're going to wait to explain. I was just wondering, you're saying like save the process context, you're like saving the process A, and then do you have like a separate process structure for the scheduler where you're like loading and saving information about that? Okay.
Can you go over specifically what context, like what information is context?
That's the next thing we're going to go over. We're saying we're swapping context. Now we're going to say, well, what the heck is context? There was someone over here that had a question.
Yes. This seems like, maybe it's just computers are so fast, but it just seems like a lot of, pretty troublesome to do to switch a context.
There's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't reduce the amount of work. And when we have a faster CPU, it just reduces the time that it takes. So back in the 70s, when we were using this was really slow. It could take milliseconds to do a context switch. Now, assembly instructions tend to run on the order of 2 instructions per nanosecond. And the time slice, that's the time that you get to run before the context switch is forced upon you. That's typically in the order of about 10 milliseconds. And that means you can run millions of instructions in each of these blocks. The maximum amount of time you're allowed to hold the CPU is called a time slice.
Okay, so this whole thing would just take 10 milliseconds?
No, this from here,
Yeah.
that whole process is probably going to take around 100 to 110 nanoseconds. Very fast. But it depends upon the operating system. Linux has more work that it does, but it has some work. It knows about the underlying processors. The processors can be things what are called hyper-threaded, which is not the same thing as multi-threaded. And they can speed this up by doing certain things in parallel. That's the scheduler, because it's run very frequently, has to be very highly optimized. We don't have an optimized one, just so that we can look at what the actual schedule algorithms are. So we're not worried about performance here. We'll never run more than a few processes, and our operating system will never be up for very long. Okay.
Just like to check my understanding of this diagram. This isn't necessarily showing context switch from PA to PV, but just from PA to whatever the scheduler decides to pick.
It's showing from PA to PB. Okay. But we know that PA doesn't know who PB is because it was selected there. So it is a context switch from PA to PB. And that's what we tell people who are not in our, remember we're in the Illuminati. Okay, we tell people who are not in the Illuminati. And as a result, when we say context switch, this is the figure that goes up in my mind. Okay, but if somebody says we're just switching from process A to process B, I just go, good. Pat on my head, give a cookie, send them a cookie. Okay.
But potentially we could switch to a PC.
Yeah, what process B is, and it turns out process B could be process A.
Yeah.
We could just switch back. It could be the only process running. It could be switched right back to it. The scheduler doesn't know because it doesn't know who this was. It's already been kicked out of the CPU.
Can the context switch ever be interrupted?
Can the context switch be interrupted? The context switch should not be interrupted. In XV6 and many systems, when we're performing the context switch, we turn off interrupts for that processor because the scheduler code is run per processor. They each have their own scheduler context. So we turn off interrupts while the scheduler is running. And as soon as the scheduler is done running, we turn them back on. So we'll turn them, the interrupts on the CPU get turned off here and get turned back on right here. Okay, because there's a phrase that when I worked in an operating systems group in Salt Lake City, one of the guys from Germany, Helga, had a phrase, it's called the 5 eyes, but what was it? Interrupting, interrupts is inefficient. And actually it tends to result in hangs and crashes and bad things like that. It's an advanced, sort of an advanced operating system programming technique that we're not going to go into because we don't have time. But there's a very good book on how Linux does it that I'd be happy to give you the title of. But most of it's not going to be really understandable until we finish the term. But yeah, we don't want anything that's dealing with an interrupt, and the scheduler runs as a result of an interrupt, and is therefore an interrupt handler. We don't want to interrupt handlers. Okay, sound confusing enough? I'm not trying to be confusing. I just don't know, without going into a graduate lecture, how to actually give more detail. I'd be happy to go over it with drawings in my office, though, if you want to know more about it. Is that okay? Sure.
Amanda just wanted to know if it was possible, so it's yes or no.
Okay. Oh, see, I just assumed you wanted to know more. It would be a very bad idea, so in general the answer is no. But if you're designing the operating system, you just need to know what it means to interrupt an interrupt handler. Okay. So we're going to say no, but, so mostly no. Linux, it's no. Unix, it's no. XV6, it's no.
So for the code from the previous slide, is that all the steps in here, or?
I'm sorry?
Just like, so the code from the previous slide, is that all the steps in the next figure?
Yeah, so what's going to happen is this is the part up here that saves process A. And then this switches to scheduler and loads the schedule. Then eventually scheduler will call to save the scheduler context and load process B's context. Does that make sense? So this context switch code is going to get called twice. Does that help? Yeah. Okay.